end, because that's the name of the second component of a line. Within the start component of a line, we have two subcomponents. One is called x, and the other one is called y, and the same applies to the end. Okay. So, do we have any questions about how column C to column F are set up, and why I choose to represent those columns in this particular somewhat hierarchical way to represent it? Okay. What is this reminding you? What is the concept of a record reminding you in terms of stuff that you would normally have to do on a day-to-day basis? Doesn't that kind of remind you that a record is somewhat like a folder, a file folder? Because a record can contain files, basically in our case, integers and booleans and stuff that cannot be broken down into smaller components. But at the same time, a record can also contain other records. Basically, it's saying that a folder can contain folders that can contain folders. So those concepts are somewhat related in terms of the concept. So now we have set up all these columns, and we are ready to execute the only line that has action in subroutine main, which is line 18. Line 18 is invoking init coord xy, and so we'll go ahead and say, okay, we need a return line number. We don't use return values. We are not using return values just yet. It will return to line 19. That's not too difficult. And it has three parameters. It has a parameter called point. It has a parameter x and also a parameter y. X, y are easy, right? Because x, y are just integers, which means each one will take up one single column. And not only that, we already know, we use 23 as a constant to specify x. We use a constant of 79 to specify y. So as a result, parameter x and parameter y are the easiest to set up. Conceptually, there's nothing new whatsoever with columns I and j. Parameter point is a little bit interesting because we have never seen anything like this. Okay, first of all, how do we only specify a part of a variable to pass by reference to something else? Does anyone want to give it a stab? Just give it a try and see whether you already know how to extend what you know to this particular program. Yep.
So what if we AKA line C through F?
Okay. AKA is good. That's a good starting point. So we know the point is still an alias of some columns, not a single column.
Is that all four of them?
Well, you have to see what we are using to specify the argument. The argument of this parameter is a line dot start.
Oh.
So we are only interested in the start component of a line. So it'll be which column to which column?
C and D.
C and D, very good. Okay. Is everybody comfortable with this concept? We haven't really introduced any new concepts. We are just combining concepts that we already know at this point. Okay. So that means when we get into the subroutine of init coord xy, we will start executing on line 10. Now, what is line 10 going to do? Okay, whoops, I made a mistake here. Line 13. Line 13 is an assignment statement. We evaluate the right-hand side first. The right-hand side is really easy. It's just x. Parameter x has a value of 23, so the right-hand side is just the value of 23. We are going to change the left-hand side based on the right-hand side value. The left-hand side refers to the x component of point. So we look up point. Point is a reference to column C and D. Column C and D has column C itself labeled as the x component. So what we'll do is just modify that one single column to 23. Are there any questions about row 8 of the trace or line 13 of the pseudocode and what it does? No questions? Okay. Yep, go ahead.
In the wrong column, shouldn't that
Oh, you're right. Yep, that's the wrong column. There we go. Thank you. And then the next line is line 14. Once you figure out line 13, line 14 is basically the same thing. Because line 14 is using y, which has a value of 79, as the right-hand side. The left-hand side is specifying point.y. Point refers to column C and D. Column C and D has column D labeled as y. So as a result, column D is the one that is modified. Are we doing okay so far with this concept? Okay. So now we can move on to line 15. Line 15 is the end of the subroutine, which means we are going to deallocate the 4 columns that we have allocated in this case and return execution back to line 19, because that's what the return line number is telling me. So we are back to line 19, which is also the end of a subroutine, in this case the end of main. And as a result, we deallocate the 5 columns that we have allocated earlier for main, and then we use the return line number in column B to return to post, and that concludes the execution of this program. Are there any questions about this program? Yep.
In column H, where it says point, aka column C, what exactly did that do? Because when X and Y already be passed to the other X and Y, is there not value?
You mean these two?
Yeah.
These are just parameters. They have nothing to do with the structure or the record. I could have named these I and J, you know. I just choose to use the same name.
I guess what I'm asking is, what did column H, where it says point, what did that do?
That's basically just saying that this stuff here represents parameter point. This is parameter X, this is parameter Y, and the 19 is our return line number. The labels, makes it easier for us to know what a column is for, so that we can look it up and say, oh, okay, we now need to access parameter X. It has a value of 23. If I don't have these 4 cells as labels, it becomes kind of difficult to figure out which column is doing what in the context of the subroutine. Okay, go ahead.
I noticed that it didn't trace any end.
Sorry?
The program doesn't end up with an end.
The program does not.
Or end.
Lines at the point.
Yeah, end remains uninitialized. Oh, okay, you're right. Yeah, I forgot to put initial values into all of these. Not just one, but all of them need to start with unknown values. Very good. You guys caught me again.
Well, that or the fact that you don't have an end point like X and Y.
Well, that's fine, because this program, as I said, doesn't really do anything. Yeah, even if I define the endpoints, it's not doing anything with the endpoint or the starting point. So that means the entire purpose of the program is to illustrate how do we pass a component of a record by reference to another subroutine. Are there any questions so far about this particular program? No questions? Okay. So let's go ahead and save this program. And we will come back and look at this program again later on if we have a chance to talk about abstract data types. This program will be useful again. Let's call this program init point or init coord, because we are initializing the coordinates of a line, of portions of a line. It seems like arrays and records, may be related somehow. Don't you guys think that both are ways to combine smaller, individual items into a bigger item? Okay, but they are different in a major way. How do we designate a particular component called an element inside an array? What is that mechanism called? how do we call the square bracket thing? Indexing, right? Indexing into an array. And what do we put inside the square brackets? Any expression that would eventually give you an integer, right? So you can use 1 if you want to. You can say I if I is an integer. You can give it a big, huge, long expression if you want to, as long as the expression evaluates to an integer value in the end. What about with records? Okay, I'm not showing the program anymore, but how do I designate a particular component inside a record? The dot notation, right? So we use the dot notation. We specify dot start. We can specify dot end. We can specify dot x. We can specify dot y. So syntax-wise, they are different already. One uses a dot, and if you look at a dot, it is equivalent to the apostrophe S of English. Okay, doesn't that make some sense? Because we are just saying that we're accessing the start component of, say, a line. And out of the start component of a line, we can go further and say that we want to access the X component of start of a line. Okay, so we can actually chain those things along if we want to. But with arrays, it uses a number to designate a particular element inside the array. So these two concepts, even though they seem to do about the same thing, they are entirely different. Okay? Every element inside an array must be of the same type. You cannot say, this element of an array is a Boolean, the next one is an integer, and so on and so forth like that. You cannot do that. But with records, we can mix and match different types for the different components of a record. So let's go ahead and take a look at how records and arrays can interact. But before we do that, let's go back to the program that we were using just moments ago, init coord. And this time I'm going to change the program to do something else. I'm going to change the source code a little bit here. And if you are writing it down, you can just write down the one line change that I'm making here. I'm going to change line 18. Instead of invoking the subroutine, I'm keeping the same subroutine so I don't have to erase anything, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to change it to a line dot end dot x gets the value of 200. Okay, that's all the change I'm making here, and make sure that I save the program as a different name. Just put a subscript 1 after that. Do we know what this line is going to do? Let's go ahead and take a look. Let's go ahead and take a look at the trace. For the most part, we just have to erase stuff that we have already here, because on line 18, we'll just erase everything over here. And here's line 18. Line 18 is going to do one thing. Yep.
It's going to initialize the x of n, right? Of a line.
Exactly. So which column are we talking about?
It's column E.
We're changing column E to 200. That's all it's going to do. Okay. And we're done. So from line 18, we still have to go to line 19, cloak, and get out of the subroutine. And then go back to post. Okay. So that really, asks a question about, the actual usefulness of init coord xy, doesn't it? Because init coord xy is basically equivalent to 2 assignment statements.